Good album. For the past 2 years during this pandemic, I've heard a range of emotions from Anglicans, from the initial fear and anxiety to determination and courage, from discouragement and fatigue to even anger and grief. But in the last little while, as vaccines have rolled out, infection numbers drop, churches, schools, and businesses start to reopen, as a new normal starts to emerge, we're starting to hear something new. Hope. Hope is bubbling up again and people are starting to dream. I want to hear about those dreams. I believe in dreams and I believe that God speaks to us through dreams. Where is God leading us next? As we come out of this pandemic, what is next for us? On Thursday, March the 10th, we will be starting a new weekly lunch hour online gathering called Tending the Soul. It's a series of honest and hopeful conversations for the church and its leaders about ministry in this time. Every Thursday at noon, live streamed over our Facebook page, a small group will discuss with me or one of our other bishops what's changed in our church and what are we learning. Where are we finding abundance in the face of disruption? What do we imagine for the future? Each hour-long session will include a conversation between church leaders, both lay and ordained, on a particular topic, with plenty of time for questions and discussion. Together, we'll hear some of the stories and best ideas from across the diocese. We'll share what's tough in ministry these days and also how we see the future unfolding. We'll talk about some of the common questions, opportunities, and challenges facing our church. And we will support each other because honestly, we're all in this together. None of us is alone. We want to create a space for conversation that is both honest and hopeful. So please join us every Thursday at noon starting on March the 10th on the Diocesan Facebook page. For the full list of dates and topics, check out our events calendar listing on our website, toronto.anglican.ca. I look forward to seeing you online for these Tending the Soul conversations as we share our dreams, seed our imaginations, and discern together what God is calling us to do, to be, and to become as Christ's church in the Diocese of Toronto.
Well, good afternoon, Susan Graham Walker, Bishop Andrew Asbel, and we were hoping that Martha Whittaker from Christ Church Brampton was going to be with us. We've had some technical issues as a result of that, but hopefully we'll be on track. I hope she's able to work it out because she certainly has a certain amount of good information and hopeful information to share with us. For those who have joined us, I'd just like to introduce Susan Graham Walker to the group. Susan is well known, I believe, to people across the diocese and including the United Church of Canada as well. She comes to the question of stewardship through the lens of discipleship, being mindful of how we steward or care for all God's resources, including money. And it means of living a life of faith and of abundance. She's a member of the stewardship team at Church of the Redeemer, having recently retired as manager of congregational giving and stewardship for both the United Church of Canada and the Anglican Church of Canada. She believes that our stewardship ministry is grounded in 3 acts: inspiring, inviting, and thanking. And within each one of these steps, we can all take to foster generosity and unleash abundance in service of God's mission. And if Martha is able to join us, I'll be happy to introduce her as well. But I think before we launch in, I'm going to invite Bishop Andrew to share with us his thoughts as we have our conversation regarding conversations around money and about generosity.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. And like you, I'm hoping that Martha will be able to join us in this hour that we have. Certainly, as we did a run through earlier in the week, she brought such energy and enthusiasm to the conversation, and I was learning a whole lot. And Susan, this will feel a little like a stewardship meeting at Church of the Redeemer, going back maybe 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel so strongly that the church at all levels needs to talk about stewardship, time, talent, and money. And the easiest conversations that we can have are about time and talent. And one of the conversations that we struggle with as Anglicans is talking about money. And yet Jesus talked about money more than almost any other topic in our scriptures. As we delve into this conversation, I'm looking forward to hearing from you, and hopefully Martha, if she's able to unmute. Oh, there you are. I think you might be live, Martha. Speak. No, that's too bad. We'll keep trying. So as Martha is trying, I'll turn things over to you, Susan, about what it is that you're learning in this time around stewardship.
That's great. I'm really disappointed that Martha isn't able to be heard at this point, because when we were beginning to talk about how we would take on this hour, I was looking forward to her starting off, and as the lively one, and me coming in with some commentary as the earnest one. So I'd like to, a little story to start. I retired on March the 1st, 2020. And then lots of things happened. I found myself being called in and called back a lot during that spring. And it was really interesting. People were calling because they were saying things like, now, I know that you were really active around stewardship, and I know you had a lot of ideas for it. What were those ideas? People kind of weren't paying quite as much attention as one might have hoped prior to that, but now this was a big opportunity. What happened, of course, is that the usual means for most congregations of receiving generosity from members wasn't able to happen. The plate didn't get passed. And so people were now suddenly wanting to know, how is it that we connect with people so that they can continue to be generous, and that we can continue to tell our story about what is happening? Because that was the other part, and we've heard on the first two sessions of this series, and we'll be hearing more. A lot of very exciting and innovative things were happening, and people were looking for ways of being the church in new ways. And there were some great stories to share. So after a few months, it really had sunk in that what we know to be good stewardship practices haven't changed. They still are grounded and basic. There's now, the difference is there is a different sense of urgency about things, and there's a few new methods that we've discovered to be able to encourage the generosity. So the three things, as was part of the introduction, that are the bedrock of any giving program, is that we need to inspire people. We need to be telling them. That means telling the story. What is it that we are doing that is making a difference? What is your generosity accomplishing? It may be paying the bills for heat and light. Well, perhaps not during the pandemic, but what's more important is, what does that enable? What ministry does that enable? So we need to keep finding the ways of telling the story, and we now have learned new ways of doing that. When the technology works, we have a lot of new opportunities for doing that. I think we also learned that that the ways of making an invitation needed to change as well. We needed to find to be consistent in communicating with people, and continuing to offer people the opportunity to support the ministry that was going on in their community. How do you do that? It is simply one person inviting another to join you in supporting God's mission where you are. And then the final thing that I think people did catch on to was offering gratitude. And some congregations, and mine did this as well, took the opportunity to find direct and personal ways of thanking people for what they had done. And that could be a springboard for the later invitation. So the thanking is so important, and I'd like you to just hear these 3 words, that whenever you're thanking, you want it to be timely, personal, and sincere. And when you can be in touch with someone as soon as they've made a donation and thank them specifically for what their contribution will do about ministry that's important to them, that's sincere gratitude. So I think the message is keep on with the fundamentals of stewardship. And I'd like to also challenge folks to begin to think about having an answer to the question that some people may now be asking is, how much should I give?
Oh.
And my experience in the past is that we've dodged that question whenever it's put to us. But perhaps now is the time to be thoughtful and figure out how we would respond if somebody asked, how much should I give? And I could tell a bit of my story, but maybe I could ask Peter if he would answer that question.
Yeah, thanks. It's a really good question.
You haven't thought about it, Peter?
Yeah, I actually have, and I speak about it a lot, and I encounter it. It's a common question that I get from individuals, and I tell them that it has to be a proportionate amount. I can't give you a specific amount because it has to be an amount that comes out of a deep conversation and prayer life with God. I don't think it comes arbitrarily. It's not a toss it on the plate sort of thing on a Sunday morning. I think it's something that we have to do intentionally. And so I think the approach that I do with most parishes, with most individuals, is I ask them to take a look at their current reality. And if you're new to the idea of giving, if this just has not been a part of what you have done in the past, that you start with a level that is realistic and meaningful, and maybe it's 1%, maybe it's 2%, maybe it's 1 hour's pay, something that is tangible and increases with time and reflects various transitions in life. So if we all started at 2.5%, which is 1 hour's pay out of 40, or if you're retired, and that became the benchmark in which you established your giving level, and it's simple, it's profound, and it applies easily for everybody. Not everybody is able to give at that level, but maybe you can start at 1% and then challenge yourself over time. But one of the other things that I encourage people to do is that when you make that commitment, make it real, make it substantive. Use pre-authorized giving as well, because our experience has been with pre-authorized giving is that people are giving of their first fruits. They're making an intentional, dedicated, prayerful response to God's generosity to us by giving off the top as opposed to what's left over. And during the pandemic, our experience had been that we saw a 15% increase in PAR usage across the diocese. And we also experienced that where we had 3 parishes in the diocese that had at least 50% of their givers using PAR before the pandemic. Right now, that number is up to 26. And in addition to that, 15 parishes across the diocese have over 70%. So people are making that transition to give of their first fruits, whether it's used through PAR or pre-authorized checks or going online and setting up something through electronic funds transfer. They're transitioning. We've seen this positive transition towards a greater generosity using a first fruits method. So start at 1%, challenge yourself annually to increase from there, maybe 2.5% if that works for you. I'm always impressed by the people who I encounter who are tithers, who give 10%. It's amazing how many people I've encountered who give 10%, see it as a liberating amount to give, and wish they could give more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think one of the things this might get into an interesting conversation with people who are watching is what has happened to the offertory as a part of our weekly ritual in this time. No plates are being passed, but is the spirit of the offertory still part of the liturgy? And I have to say, I think we're missing something there. In my experience, it's like, oh, we can't pass the plate. We'll just jump over that bit, and I think that maybe we at our peril. But I don't know what other people's experience with that is.
Well, I see in the online comments is that, and this comes from Maria Nightingale, and she says we still have to pay for the heat and the lights. So, I mean, that's a bare bones issue. That's, we have to sustain our ministry if we're going to continue to be church in the traditional pattern. The needs of this church still continue, whether we're meeting in person or not, whether it's done virtually, whether it's through small group ministry or Bible study. The ministry of the church has to find ways to continue, and I don't know how we can neglect the offertory component as well.
I think one of the, if I could jump in, one of the pieces you're highlighting, Susan, is around the offertory is watching giving in action. That it is a physical and a spiritual experience. And back to the original question that you asked, Peter, which is how much do you give? How do you learn how to give, and to what extent? And when I think about my own journey, and the two of you have heard me tell this story, but it may be worthy of repeating. When I grew up in Churchland as a kid, your mom and dad gave us a dime or a quarter to pass to the plate, and it was an action. But you also knew that the gift was not necessarily yours. It was that you were holding it. It was the family gift, and you were passing that on to the plate. But you didn't actually have a sense of how that was connecting with your own spiritual experience. And for me, the change really came in watching stewardship in action around money. When I was a curate in Guelph, we were embarking on a diocesan campaign, and I had the joy of going out with the suffragan bishop to do some lead gifts, large asks. And this was back in 1989, and the bishop and I got really good going into visits. He would put the pitch out, I would do the ask, and we would switch roles. And one day we wound up at Jim's home, and Jim lived in a very humble home, and he would come at 8:00. And the other thing that he did as a part of his ministry was to count money on Monday morning. And he was a lovely, lovely man. And the folder that we were given said we're to ask Jim for $100,000. And back in 1989, that was a lot of money. It's a lot of money now. And the bishop and I wondered whether or not somebody had inadvertently put an extra zero at the end. And it was my turn to do the ask. And Bishop Clarence did a beautiful presentation. And I hummed and I hawed all the way through the ask. Jim, would you give us 100,000? And he said very quickly, I'd love to. But I can only write you a check today for 25,000. Would that be okay? And I have to say, I was gobsmacked. And it took me another 2 months to gird up my courage to go back to talk to Jim on a Monday morning after the count was finished. And I said, Jim, I want to know how you learned how to do that. How did you, with one swoop of a pen, you paid more than my annual salary as a curate. And I'd like to know how you learned how to do that. And he said, and I'll never forget this, Andrew, when you love something so much, it is a joy to give.
Yeah.
And I have to say, that's when I went home and I looked at what I was giving on the plate, and I thought, I guess I have to rethink
Mhm.
how important this is to me.
Mhm.
And so often in our culture, we talk about giving until it hurts. I think Churchland is about give until it feels joyful, give till it feels right. You
Yep.
know, Paul says, God loves a cheerful giver. And that is, I think, the art of learning how to watch that generosity happen in your midst, to learn from elders who have been at this for a lifetime, and to know what people are actually offering is critical.
And perhaps having people like that share their own story when they have the courage and are able to say why they give, and to
Mhm.
share that with other people in the congregation, and to talk about their own uh, challenges and struggles of getting to the point of generosity that they're at right now. Uh, people, well, it is a really still a huge taboo, and we don't talk about it as a part of our lives. Yet it obviously is so fundamental. So finding ways of people sharing their story about a topic that is so difficult, I think could break things open for
Mhm.
a congregation. Um,
Mhm.
so there was a message there from Maria Nightingale, and she gave a list of the ways in which people can give, and I think we're going to continue to be, offering all sorts of ways. It used to be that everything just came in on the plate, it got
Yep.
counted,
Yep.
it was all very simple. There's a longer list of how people make that transaction now,
Right.
and another one in there is Canada Helps. And I'd like to
Mhm.
encourage congregations to think carefully about this, because we want the gift to move from simply being a transaction
Right.
to being a relationship. And if what happens is that the that it that an amount of money just kind of automatically goes through the church into a bank account, maybe people, we're not totally aware all the time of all the ways that people are giving, and all the ways we need um, to learn to know what has happened, so that we can be in relationship with people.
Yeah,
Um,
and it seems odd to me that so frequently we live giving to chance,
mhm.
that because of that uncomfortability about talking about money, that and generosity for that matter, that we just we assume people know what to give, and we just leave it at that. And we took a look at what was the practice in parishes during the pandemic, and we found that many of our parishes weren't actually asking for a gift during their online services. Now, I don't know why that was, why we made that shift, that when we went online, that somehow that that was kicked out of the pattern in terms of our gift giving. Maybe it was because uh, we felt we felt that maybe we were going to be attractional to a new set of people, and we didn't want the conversation to be so focused around money. Yet Jesus spoke about money and our what we turn into false gods quite a lot through Scripture. But it did, we didn't carry it over. We pivoted well when we came to moving online, but we didn't pivot the ask as well. Although I will say our online giving did go up significantly.
Well, and it's so interesting that uh, the arts and theaters have no issue asking. Hospitals have no issues asking. Universities have no issues asking. Most of us finished our undergraduate degree, and we continue to get mail from our
Yeah.
university or college or high school, and they have no issues at all in asking. And sometimes we as folks in Churchland feel apologetic. And yet, when we think about how much time we have spent within our own church communities, the life that we have received and offered to others on the journey, far more than any university likely has served in our lives, and how we support each other on that journey. I think there's something also in the words of Meister Eckhart who said the soul grows by subtraction and not by addition. And we live in a consumer society that says if I just have enough, if I just have enough, if I just accumulate, I will find meaning and my soul will grow. But actually, the opposite, I think, is true. I think Meister Eckhart's onto something. That it's when we let go of that which is valuable, when we let go of our money, when we offer it to another with no strings attached, there's a part of us that is unburdened, and we watch that gift that has been given to us actually pass through us to the next community or person as a gift. Everything belongs to God. It all belongs to God, and how we offer that back to our neighbor brings new life.
So, earlier that I was asked what should people give. That's actually the most common question I get from lay people. But the most common question I get from clergy is, what should I know? And I think that's a really critical question as well, because I think that through the conversation of giving and generosity, there's not only is there a veil of secrecy that exists about what actually goes onto the collection plate, but there's also there's a sense that perhaps only the envelope secretary ought to know what people are giving. And what are your thoughts on that?
Can I go first?
Okay.
This is one of my favorites. The question is usually cast is should clergy know what people give? And I've repositioned it to be, what should clergy know about what people give as a minimum? And it is turning the transaction of a gift into a relationship. And so there are a couple of these are a few of the times when clergy should know about giving. A clergy should know every time a person makes a first gift. And they don't necessarily need to know how much that is, but somebody has said, I want to contribute to what you're doing. And I think that's worthy of acknowledgement, as timely and as personally, as sincerely as we can do it. And having it come from a leader in the congregation, I think, is really important. The second time, and this is even more important, is when somebody signs up somehow for monthly giving or regular giving. That person is actually decided has shown confidence in what you do and wants to be part of it. And this is an opportunity to welcome them into that relationship, to find out more about what they're looking for, and to say thank you for making that kind of commitment to what goes on in our community. And then every time there is an unusual gift, an extra gift, it would be a lovely conversation to say, I was told that you have made an additional gift that's quite substantial, or whatever you want to say about it. Tell me about why have you been so generous? What has provoked this? And it might be you preaching great sermons, or it might be I got a raise and I want to do more, or I believe in what we're doing. But it's an opportunity for a conversation about this simple transaction. And it is a way that we do communicate through money. And that's one way of going about it. And I think there are some other more challenging times when clergy might need to know about things. But if you could just start with those three, I think we would have some change in culture that would be most welcome to the donor, and not that difficult for clergy to do.
Thanks for that, Susan. I know you and I have had many conversations about this topic, and you and I have done the same, Peter. I think the moment for me when I discovered what others were giving was when I had that conversation with Jim. It was a moment early in my ministry about learning the generosity of members in a community. I think the second time that I learned about giving was when I had to pull together my first budget in my parish in Acton when I was a new incumbent. And I had no idea how we were basing income and envelope givings because I didn't have any information. And sometimes the reports that we would get about what people were giving was helpful in sort of overall arches. But I have found over time, and it began actually in Acton, learning what people actually give was really important to me. It has been my experience in parish ministry that our parishioners tell us a lot about their lives. All of it sacred, all of it confidential, that is important to keep as a cleric, unless given permission to share. And I think money needs to be a part of that too. Somewhere along the lines in Churchland, we've kind of separated money from the rest of our pastoral duties, almost like church and state. But they actually go together because generosity and tithing and offering actually is tied rooted very much to who we are as Christians. What I have found really important over time is, as you say, Susan, watching the trends. I always used to say to our bookkeeper at Redeemer, tell me when somebody stops, tell me when there's a change, so that I can look too, and I'm happy to pick up the phone. And often in picking up the phone leads to a different kind of conversation. Sometimes it's that, I forgot I got a new Visa card and it didn't come out that month. And in other cases, you learn that there has been a shift in the family income, and there needs to be a time when when the family says, I'm not able to give. I have found over time, watching the trends, I know some clergy worry that if I see what people give, I might treat them differently. That has actually never been my experience. What I find is incredible gratitude for the generosity of a community and how people offer that gift. And that gives me encouragement to be able to teach about tithing and money. It also gives me encouragement to preach about it. Mm-hmm. And it also gives opportunity to know what the capacity might be for the parish itself. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I have found over time is that in some parishes, for instance, some of our most generous people, if our parish, you discover that your most generous people are all 85 years and up, and they're giving about 20% of your budget, then somehow that information, without breaking confidence, needs to come back into the parish system to say, things need to change because our horizon is changing. It gives opportunity in that regard. The other is, and touching quickly, Susan, on your comment, it has given me opportunity to go to folks and say, I am so amazed at how generous you are. And it's not about the amount they give at all. Yeah. And would you be willing to talk about what that's been like for you? The other is that I've, on 2 occasions in my ministry, have gone to parishioners to say, I think you're giving too much. Where we do an ask, that's an annual ask in a parish, and they take it to heart and they just keep giving and they keep giving. And I know that they're on fixed incomes, and I say to them, I think you may be giving too much. Mm-hmm. And that opens a different kind of conversation.
I think there's some comments coming in and talking about trying to, Max's comment right here, making sure that we are not making people feel marginalized or humiliated by the size of their gift. And again, it isn't about the size of the gift so much as is helping people to experience the pleasure of giving and making a contribution. And whenever we do a program, it's thank you for all that you have done. And if that's the limit of that, thank you very much. And we are always grateful. But it's also an opportunity for others to take a look at if this kind of ministry is something that you want to support. And the story of what we're doing in our community, whether it's told by testimonial or by a narrative budget or whatever, that's all giving people the reason to give. And that story needs to be told not at a stewardship Sunday only, but as something that is a part of the pattern of the life of the congregation. Hearing those stories is so important.
Well, and I think it's really critical to acknowledge the fact that all gifts are welcome in the church, that however large or small, what we want to do is encourage generosity. We want to cultivate a spirit of generosity where we recognize the giftedness that we have and that we have received from our relationship with Jesus Christ. And I think that over time it becomes normative that we want to contribute more, but taking that first step and to make that first step in generosity is absolutely critical. I tend to approach the whole concept, the whole idea of people being in a position where they may feel that they aren't able to give as much as they want. I'm always cognizant of the fact that there are other ways in terms of time and talent that people can give if they're in a situation where giving financially is very difficult. People are always going through transitions in their life as well, whether they may be transitioning between jobs, they may be off on sick leave, they may be taking care of a sick parent. And so their financial reality has changed as a result. That may impact their giving at church. This is where actually having that relationship, that information on the part of the cleric and senior leadership about what people are giving can be helpful, and it can extend to a greater pastoral conversation as well in our parishes.
And if we're talking about time and talent being part of the equation, then offering gratitude about all that people give and being as specific as possible when you are thanking people, I think is vital and makes the whole venture much more complete. We are recognizing that if all that we ever thank people for is the money they give,
right,
then that's only part of the picture. So how do we thank them for all of the rest as well?
And you will know, as part of the Growing Healthy Stewards program that we have in the diocese, that one of the important aspects of that is extending a sense of gratitude that's celebrated on a weekly basis, that we want to acknowledge an individual or group of people within our parishes who are contributing of their time and talent. Because I think it's really important to let people know that we're not just thanking them when they make a financial gift, right? We're thanking them for being a part of the ministry of the church. We're grateful that they are choosing to spend their time on a Sunday morning with us in prayer and in celebration. We're thankful that they're participating with us at Saturday morning Bible study, that they're contributing to the parish bazaar, that they're visiting a lonely person, whether it be through Zoom or in person. We have to extend that sense of gratitude and have it permeate our life and not just be reflected in terms of a transaction. It's not simply based on money. It's based on an intentional discipleship.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if people are putting some comments in, and I'm wondering if there are any specific questions you want to put this group on the hot seat about.
Do you want to say that again, Susan? Sorry, I was reading a comment.
I was just saying I'm wondering if there are any other comments that people would or questions that people who are listening would like to pose quite specifically at this point to further direct the conversation.
Well, I think there's been a question raised about volunteerism and how that can be used to support the ministry of the church as well.
Of course.
Well, and Boyd, I think it was in our first conversation, we talked about how hard the last couple of years has been on our clergy leadership, deacons, priests, and bishops alike. But boy, our lay folk at all levels, from wardens to council members to Sunday school teachers, every volunteer ministry, the time that has been put into it, the effort of going outside of our comfort zone. It's that the last 2 years we have all learned something new about what it means to be church. And I think that's something that we need to bring into the future as we move beyond this pandemic. Is how do we create that generosity and thanksgiving? Because the last 2 years of sacrificial giving in time, talent, and treasure is teaching us something about just how incredibly generous our communities are.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to share with the group, with those present with us, about life during pandemic, because we saw some real acts of generosity on the part of individuals within our diocese. You know, the last 2 years cumulatively saw more giving to FaithWorks than any other time in the history of our annual campaign. We received over $3.2 million from individuals, from corporations, from foundations, and a robust increase in online giving and giving through direct mail. And it just leaves me so encouraged because, you know, yeah, we all, no one really liked the pandemic, but it forced us to look at doing things differently in the church that maybe we might not have gotten there if it weren't for the pandemic. I think it forced us to use God's resources in different ways. So we shifted to online, and we started thinking of doing events online as well, and we started to try and engage with people and tell stories online about what we were doing. We even defaulted in our department to putting a great deal of energy into what some were saying was a dead fundraising vehicle, and that was direct mail. And we saw huge increases in direct mail and online giving. In April of 2020, we received more gifts online in that month alone than in the entire year before. And so there was a huge trend. I know people wanted to make a difference, but it was more than that. It was a recognition that we can do things differently. And so the talk that we're an old church, or that perhaps the people who are older just won't embrace the new technology, it just didn't happen. Quite the contrary. We started seeing people using our QR code technology that we introduced for events. The online giving went up, EFT went up, and I'm enthusiastic about what has happened in terms of giving and generosity in our diocese. Even in the pandemic, 25% of our parishes saw increases in giving in terms of supporting the operations. So I know it wasn't easy, but I think somehow many of our parishes excelled and even prevailed.
I think there's also something about we learned something about generosity as a diocese in offering the Jubilee.
Yeah.
Early in the pandemic, diocesan council making the decision to sell properties in order to bring some relief for parishes around clergy pay for 3 months and allotment for 3 months. That also, as I have heard from parishes, that created a new sense of generosity and confidence in parishes and facing a very uncertain future, of knowing that we as a whole diocesan family, we're saying to each other, we're in this together. We really are here to support the large parishes and the small parishes, and that's going to cost us something. And I feel tremendous pride in it when that decision was made and how important it has been to us.
So, Elizabeth, a question is asked by Lynn Wilson, and she asks, "Our buildings are bankrupting us where I attend, leaving virtually nothing for spiritual development mission." And so, how do we, that is, I mean, there's been deferred maintenance with our parishes, and so how do we balance that with our desire to want to invest in mission and ministry?
I think it's going to take some rethinking of what our buildings are there for and how they could serve the community and alternative uses for buildings. Now that's a much bigger question of how ministry across the diocese is organized, and the ways that we could turn our physical resources into more direct engagement with the communities around us 7 days a week, as opposed to
That's a good point.
one or part of the building being used only part of the week. That's a challenging task to undertake, but I think it's a question that is right in our faces right now because of the pandemic.
Well, and boy, have we learned something about the value of buildings during this pandemic when we've been closed out of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we've learned that we can actually worship and be a Christian community, an Anglican community on Zoom, and to be closed off from our buildings. And we've learned something about attaching to each other in a different way. And we've also learned something about how incredibly valuable our buildings are now that we're able to return, and we see them in a different way. I think as a diocese, we've been taking the long view on buildings in trying to understand how we see our buildings having a life cycle, a beginning, a middle, and an end. In some cases, how we have been amalgamating parishes that need to be amalgamated, regionalized ministries that are growing during pandemic, that are teaching us about how we use the property in different ways, using property for outreach. I liken our buildings and our properties almost like a green field. And to try and imagine that, God is calling us as the church not into a 5-year future or 25-year future, but a 300-year future, a 500-year future, or to the end of time, whatever that may be. That is our witness as a Christian church. And so if we look at who we are attached to our buildings, how far can we go into the future? Do we see 500 years? What do our buildings look like? What can we do differently for the next 100 years with the property that God has given to us? That might become housing, it might become communal space, it could be shared space with other community members. And then the next 100 years, what might it be?
Ross Carter asks one of my favorite questions that I get from people, and that is, do I give of my net or of my gross? I say just give, but I want to hear what everyone else says.
God doesn't give net or gross. God gives, right? And although it is true that when we pay taxes, we are in fact undertaking things that are of value and worth in society. So I think that is something to keep in mind. I think the question at the end of the question there is around causes always needing more. This is where giving our folks as much information about the impact of what their generosity is doing will help people make a decision for themselves as to where they want what they want to support. And I think one of the things that I just don't think we've told the story well enough, powerfully enough, that so that we're not giving people as much information as we could, so that people can make it their own informed decision.
Yeah. Well said, Susan.
So the other question that I frequently get from people is I'm new to the church. I'm new to this whole idea of giving. It hasn't been part of my practice. How do I establish some sort of routine or regularized way of giving to the church? Because I've decided to make my home. So you're new, you're introduced. I mean, I presume the very first thing you don't do when you walk into a church and you're meeting with new people is give them a box of offering envelopes. But maybe you do. What's your approach? What's your approach?
My own approach is to start where they are, and to be able to have a conversation about what is going to feel good, and if you know people in your congregation as folks who are givers, to be able to encourage them to buddy up with somebody who is new, who can teach them, mentor them in their own journey of generosity, and this takes a lifetime to learn. This is not something you learn in a few weeks' time. It really is about learning how to become a faithful, cheerful giver for your life.
It's trying to answer the question: what matters to you, and what and what are you most interested in contributing to? And then I think people would be helped if others would share how they have made those kinds of decisions.
Right.
What has gone into their perhaps longer term practice, and so I think it's about dialogue and having conversation about a taboo topic, and doing that in a safe way that is going to make people feel comfortable, not uncomfortable, and it will provide a real opportunity for folks.
Cynthia Majeski is asking a really important question. It's posted at the bottom of the screen here for us, for the three of us. And she talks about storytelling and why that's so important. What stories can churches tell that are going to be more enriching, that are going to really capture the imagination of people in the congregation?
Oh my goodness, there are so many. And back to your comment, Susan, about what matters to you. Sometimes those stories are outreach stories. They're what a congregation is doing in serving the needs of the poor, or it's serving the needs of somebody or a community that's disenfranchised. It's visiting the sick in hospital. It's the generosity of communities that take the risk to grow and to take on visions that are beyond themselves, that is going to cost time, talent, and treasure that they didn't think they had, and being able to say, I want to be a part of that. I really want to be a part of that. It means something to me.
I think, again, we as congregations need to find ways of talking about what the money does, not where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
When we go to a vestry meeting and we see a line item budget, you're seeing where the money has gone. You're not seeing what the money has done. And line item budgets serve an essential purpose, but they're not very revealing to congregation members about what it actually does. So if you can find ways of sharing, having people, it can be staff, it can be lay leaders, it can be anybody, talking about what was the impact of the life of the congregation on them. And there are many stories in any congregation. So it's finding the ways of doing the storytelling. We can do that. You can do that person to person. You can do that in writing. You could do little vignettes of people that you could then edit so that something that you might want to say doesn't take up all of the announcements at the end of a service, but you've got a message. So we have the means. We just need to put them into story form and tell them.
I remember that Christmas Eve years ago, Susan, you may remember this, standing on the steps before the late night service. And in those days, I used to greet people as they're coming into the church. And an SUV pulled up on the opposite side, south side of Bloor Street. And somebody I had never seen before, this fellow ran across the street, saw me there in my church garb, and he said, "Are you with the church?" And I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "I'd like to give you this because I'd like it to be a donation to the drop-in that you have here at the church." And then he got in his truck and drove away. And I opened the envelope, and there was $1,500 inside. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
No expectation of anything in return.
And I think those are the stories that we deny telling about the effect that a parish might have in a community. How somebody is inspired to give because it's saving somebody's life. Yep. It's making a difference in their life. And I think, to your point, Susan, it's not where it goes, it how it transforms lives.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've quickly come to the end of our hour on this conversation about generosity. It's unfortunate that Martha Whittaker couldn't have been with us.
Yeah.
Because,
so
as you know from our previous conversation that we were going to have, I think she would have added had a robust contribution to the conversation, and maybe we can figure out a way to get her back at a later session, because I think she has a powerful story to share about her own parish experience. So at this point, though, and I mean, I see a number of other questions that have come along that we could have talked about regarding children and exposing young people to generosity. They'll have to wait for another conversation. But we've come to the end of this, our third session. I'm delighted about the conversation that we've had and the areas that we've touched upon. And at this point, I just want to pass things over to Bishop Andrew and take us to closing. Thanks so very much.
Thank you, Peter and Susan. And like you, I look forward to giving Martha a whole show unto herself, and look forward to watching because, as you say, such a dynamo. The one story that biblical story that we talked briefly about last week was, from my perspective, was the story of the feeding of the 5,000. And from my perspective, it's such a beautiful testimony to stewardship. That 5,000 hungry souls are being so compelled to listen to Jesus speak and transform their lives. That when 5 loaves and 2 fish go through the crowd, that it is in reaching deep within ourselves that we offer not just for us, but for the other, that we become a blessing, and the blessing is passed through us, so that there are 12 baskets full. We live in abundance. We do not live in scarcity. The world tries to believe it's scarce. God continually calls us to understand that we are in abundance and called to abundant living. And so on that note, a deep thanks to you, Susan, for being with us today, and Peter for organizing it. Sure. And I wonder if on behalf of those online, we might say the words of the grace together. Sure. The grace
of our Lord Jesus Christ,
the love of
God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore.
Amen.
Amen.
Thanks,
Peace, everyone. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.